everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and happy Sunday, June 21st of 2026. Now, I have a really short, simple message today, and this is because I had a situation about a week and a half ago where I took my own advice that I've been giving myself for years on the power of pausing before responding and reacting, and I did beautifully. And then this past week, I had another situation where I did not pause. And the situation just needed to have some clarity around it, not my reaction to it. I just needed to pause for a second. So here's what I wrote. Pause, listen, shut up, stay quiet in private, and process before you speak or react. That's the very first thing I wrote in my journal, which was Tuesday. And I wrote this all on Tuesday because both of these were emails from situations, people that I had had an interaction with in person. And then there was an email back and forth between us. And these are two separate situations. So about a week and a half ago, I had a great response. I had an email that triggered me a little bit, and I sat on it for 2 days. And the way I responded was completely different than I would have responded. I had a lot of time to think about it. And I was so grateful because I had a chance to let some common sense come in, and I got to release the emotions that were attached to my reaction. And then, so that was a week and a half ago. Then just a few days ago, completely different situation, but someone that I had an interaction with in person, we made an agreement, and then there was an email follow-up, and it was not what I thought. And I only paused for about 5 minutes, which is not a long enough pause sometimes, especially for me. Because when I see something, especially if it's business and it's something that I wouldn't do, and it's then my response is going to be this. My response, the gist of it is going to be the same, but the way that the way I respond and the words I use and the clarity I'm able to convey, it always changes if I pause. So here's what I expanded on. So when I pause, it creates a gap between the stimulus and my response. So something that stimulates me to respond in any way. So there's a gap. The pause gives you a gap. Many mistakes happen because the gap disappears. Okay? Listen, gather information before forming a conclusion. I find that this is increasingly rare. And this is why it takes constant practice, right? And wow, like it's so beautiful when you see this quality in younger people, because I think that this is something that we gain as wisdom as we get older. And while I've had my moments where I've been really good, I've had my moments where I wish I would have just paused, listened, stayed quiet, right? And then I wrote, of course, shut up. The harshness is intentional. Okay, it's not just speak less. It's a challenge to it's a challenge to our ego. Okay, it challenges our ego, our desire to be heard, significant, and validated. Right now, the stay quiet and private part that just kind of got thrown in because it seems to me when I share or overshare, and especially when I'm in an emotional state, I have regrets that I wish I hadn't shared so much, because then things change and even the way I feel about things change, and I wish I hadn't shared it, right? I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. And then process before you speak or react. So what I realized this is reflection becomes a competitive advantage. When I am able to pause and reflect, that is a huge advantage. And it can be a competitive advantage in whatever. And even if you could take the word competitive out of there, right? So the person who thinks clearly often outperforms the person who responds quickly. I would rather respond clearly. And if I can respond clearly and quickly, then I'm becoming a master, right? Okay, so I am going to keep this super brief because I have a couple of questions that I am going to journal on this week, and that's where I'm going to leave it, okay? So these aren't meant to make me feel good. These are meant to make me just be honest with myself as I really work on this, because this is something that I want to get this as a superpower. So what am I pretending not to know? If I turn inward, I have the answers to everything, right? And then this, where am I speaking when I should be listening? You know, I'm going to sit and write, where are all the situations where I shouldn't be speaking, I should be listening. And then after I listen, give a pause, then it's a good time to pause before just jumping with my response, right? And then this, how much of my stress comes from reality and how much comes from my inability to stay still or to pause? You know, how much of my stress comes from something that's really real? We all know we create our reality, right? It's kind of crazy. Okay, and then this. What would the best and wisest version of me stop explaining? Sometimes we don't need to explain or over explain ourselves. If I were to look at the best and wisest version of myself, what would I stop explaining? Okay. Here's what I wrote. Where am I over arguing, over sharing, over defending, over justifying, or over proving because I need like permission from someone else instead of my own judgment? It's really interesting. What I found is when a person goes through really, really hard things and other people in your life don't know all the details, because I think that's, unless you overshare, and sometimes you can't even share the nuances of the hard things that happen. Like for me, the last 2 years from, all of 2020 through all of 2024 and all of 2025, clear to the very end of 2025, I dealt with a very intensive government investigation into my business. And I look back on that with like, it's kind of amazing because I actually kept that pretty private, even from some of my siblings, because and what I realized is that I could have shared details, um, and I think it would have helped people understand even more. When I went through my first marriage and I got a divorce, it's really hard to explain to someone when you're getting a divorce all the nuances of why you're getting a divorce, because they didn't live it, they weren't in it. I'm not sure why I brought that up, but I think no one will ever know the nuances of why you did things or why you didn't. So what would the wisest version of me stop explaining? Okay. And I'm going to read this part again. Where am I over arguing, oversharing, over defending, over justifying, or over proving because I need external permission from trusting my own judgment? And it's okay if people don't know all the stuff. Let them make their own judgments. This is why when we do our own inner work, our own personal development, and we study things like the 4 agreements where we don't make assumptions, we don't know what's going on in other people's lives. We don't know why people respond to us the way they do. There might be things we don't understand. In fact, there's always things we don't understand and we don't even know for the most part, right? So, and then one final question, okay? And it ties directly into that sentence that I did. Pause, listen, shut up, stay quiet and private, and process before you speak or react. So here's the final question. It's going to be nice and short and sweet. I love it. When was the last time silence changed my mind? I love this question because it changes my mind almost every single time when I'm quiet. And I take that pause, that beautiful pause, and I listen. And I have to tell you, it has become one of the things that I enjoy the most is sitting in a conversation, not with me and one person. If I'm having a conversation with one person, I'm not just going to stay quiet, of course. But if I'm sitting in a room of people or a social gathering or whatever, it is actually it's an amazing thing to just listen. and observe, right? So when was the last time silence changed my mind? And this is where I'm talking about when we overreact to something, right? So then I wrote this, and this time I'm going to end it. So, not when silence helped me to calm down. When was the last time I sat quietly with an uncomfortable truth long enough that it fundamentally altered how I saw myself, another person, or the direction of my life? Okay, I'm going to say that again. When was the last time I sat quietly with an uncomfortable truth long enough that it fundamentally altered how I saw myself, another person, or the direction of my life? Really beautiful. I realize this. Most people can remember arguments that changed them. Okay. Fewer can remember silence that changed them. Okay. So we all remember the arguments because look at that. Two egos back and forth, blowing up at each other instead of staying quiet, staying curious, and listening, right? And then I wrote this. I think this is the most important skill for the rest of this decade, and maybe even the whole other decade. You know, we are in the middle of 2026, and um, I believe the world is a beautiful place, and I really believe that we are here to help usher in a higher frequency of beautiful Christ consciousness. That's why we're here, because I think we see it, and of course, not everybody sees it. It doesn't take everybody. Um, in fact, it everybody can't because it's just not the way it works. So I would love to know what you think about this. Do you have an example of a time where you actually paused and it completely changed your life? You know, I think that's the question. So few can remember the silence that changed your life. So many people can remember the arguments, but very few people can remember the silence that changed their life. So let me know what you think about this. I hope you have an absolute beautiful, beautiful last week in June, and we will see you next Sunday.